Welcome back to 40 Days of Lent with the Screwtape letters. Today's chapter introduces a new character, the patient's mother, and with her, one of the most quietly subversive ideas in the entire book. Because today, Screwtape is going to teach us something about gluttony, and it is almost certainly not what you think. As always, let's begin with a prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world for the ruin of souls. Amen. Wormwood, it seems, has been dismissing gluttony as a rather crude and unimpressive tool, the kind of thing that catches obvious sinners, not sophisticated patients. Screwtape opens by putting him firmly in his place. He explains, "The contemptuous way in which you spoke of gluttony as a means of catching souls only shows your ignorance. One of the great achievements of the last 100 years has been to deaden the human conscience on that subject, so that by now you will hardly find a sermon preached or a conscience troubled about it in the whole length and breadth of Europe." Think about that for a moment. When did you last hear a homily or sermon on gluttony? When did you last examine your conscience on it? For most of us, it barely registers as a serious spiritual concern. And according to Screwtape, that is a deliberate achievement of hell, the result of a long, patient campaign to remove it from the moral radar entirely. But here is the twist. Screwtape is not primarily interested in the obvious kind of gluttony, the person who gorges themselves, who eats vast quantities, who physically overindulges. That kind, he says almost dismissively, is the crude version. What he is really interested in is something far more socially acceptable, invisible, and more dangerous. He calls it the gluttony of delicacy. And this is where the patient's mother comes in. On the surface, she seems quite temperate. In fact, she always asks for very little. She makes a point of it, and even complains when she's given more food than she expected. "Oh, please, please, all I want is a cup of tea, weak but not too weak, and the teeniest, weeniest bit of really crisp toast." You see the picture. So how could she possibly be a glutton? Lewis, through Screwtape, identifies exactly what is happening beneath the performance of modesty. It is not the quantity that matters. It is the insistence, the tyrannical precision, the fact that whatever is actually provided will somehow always fall just short of what she requires. Screwtape explains, "She never recognizes as gluttony her determination to get what she wants, however troublesome it may be to others. At the very moment of indulging her appetite, she believes that she is practicing temperance." And this is the genius of the gluttony of delicacy. It disguises itself as its opposite. The woman genuinely believes she is being restrained, even ascetic. She wants so little after all, but what she actually wants is total, exacting control over that little, and she will make everyone around her quietly miserable in the pursuit of it. Screwtape describes the result with devastating precision. He calls it the all-I-want state of mind. All she wants is tea made properly. All she wants is toast at exactly the right crispness. All she wants is an egg boiled to a very specific degree. And because no servant, no cook, no friend can ever quite achieve the impossible standard of her memory and imagination, daily disappointment produces daily ill temper. Cooks end up getting frustrated and resign, and her friends just can't stand her anymore. And the woman's belly has come to dominate her entire emotional life, without her ever once suspecting it, because the quantities involved are so very small. Now, why does this matter spiritually? because it leads to a soul that is so finely tuned to getting exactly what it wants in exactly the way it wants, that the slightest frustration of any appetite, however small, throws the whole person into irritability, impatience, and unkindness. A person who cannot be denied a cup of tea without becoming uncharitable is, in a very real sense, enslaved, even if the cup of tea is perfectly reasonable. And this brings us to something Saint Josemaria says in the way that cuts to the heart of the matter. Overeating is the forerunner of impurity. It's a striking claim and worth unpacking. The logic is not complicated, but it is profound. Appetite is appetite. The person who has never learned to govern what goes into their mouth, who gives in habitually to every nutritional craving, who cannot fast, who cannot accept what is put before them without complaint, has in a very concrete way trained themselves in the habit of surrender to appetite. And habits formed in one area do not stay neatly contained. The soul that cannot say a small no to the belly will find it significantly harder to say the necessary no when the sexual appetite presents itself with far greater force and urgency. Screwtape himself makes this connection explicitly, noting that gluttony of excess is useful chiefly as what he calls artillery preparation for attacks on chastity. In other words, it loosens the defenses, it conditions the soul to easily surrender, and once that pattern is established, the more serious assaults have a much easier time. This is why the Church has always linked fasting with chastity, not as an arbitrary pairing, but as a recognition that the body is one system. The person who fasts, who practices small and regular acts of self-denial at the table, is not just being pious. They are training a muscle. They are practicing in a relatively low-stakes arena the fundamental spiritual skill of saying, "My appetite does not have the final word. I do, and with God's grace, I choose." In his book, The City of God, St. Augustine sums it up by saying, and I paraphrase, that there are two kinds of people in this world: those that allow their passions to take control of their reason, and those that allow their reason to control their passions. Lent, of course, is structured around exactly this practice, governing our passions. The days of fasting and abstinence are not punishments, they are training sessions, small, repeated acts of choosing not to give the belly everything it demands, and in doing so, building the capacity to make those small, decisive choices in other more important matters of our lives as Christians. So, what are our resolutions for today? First, examine your relationship with food honestly, not for quantity, but for insistence. Are you the kind of person who, when denied something small and specific, becomes irritable, impatient, or unkind? Do you suddenly throw a tantrum simply because there's no salt on the table or the water isn't the temperature you like? The restaurant doesn't have just that kind of dish that you supposedly always take. If the answer is yes, you have found something genuinely worth working on this Lent. Practice accepting, cheerfully and without complaint, whatever is placed before you. It is a small thing, and it is not a small thing. The second, make one small fast this week. Skip a snack, decline a second helping, go without something you habitually reach for, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet act of training. Because, as Saint Josemaria strikingly reminds us, the day you leave the table without having done some small mortification, you have eaten like a pagan. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next episode of 40 Days of Lent with the Screwtape Letters.